Okay, well, thank you for coming and listening to my talk, Becoming a Manager in DevRel. A little bit about me. So my name is Jaime Lopez Jr. I'm on the internet in various forms as @DevWithAHair. So if you want to reach out and ask more questions days after the conference, weeks after the conference, find me on Twitter. I'm also on GitHub as DevWithAHair, and you can find the slides for this session there. So if you missed something, don't worry, you'll be able to find the slides there. Also, it's worth noting that in my personal life, I co-host a technical podcast called More Than Just Code. That's at mtjc.fm. And let's talk first about my path to management. So I was an individual contributor as a developer advocate before and became a manager about 6 months ago now. But my path didn't start in DevRel. In fact, actually, I was a software engineer, more specifically a iOS developer for many years prior to joining into the DevRel community. And really, it started 2 years ago, about now, a little bit more than 2 years ago at DevRelCon Tokyo, where, again, I had a podcast called More Than Just Code, and I had this hopefully slightly interesting idea of what if I gave a talk there called, helping developers by podcasting. And I was very fortunate to be selected, went to Tokyo, gave the presentation, met a ton of really, really great DevRel professionals there. And I thought to myself, this is actually pretty interesting. I think this might be something fun to do as a full-time thing. I'm already doing the podcasting thing as a way to help developers as after work sort of thing. What if I turn that into my actual job? And about 6 months later, I was actually fortunate enough to get my job as a developer advocate at Jack Henry, which Jack Henry is a banking as a service or fintech company. And I was very lucky to get hired there as their first and only DevRel at the company, first in history over there. And when I joined, I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I don't know if I know what I'm doing here. This is kind of overwhelming. Can I actually do this job as a full-time developer advocate? And, there were a lot of different resources, a lot of different people that I met previously at the conference and other resources I found after the fact online and books and etc. And after a while, I actually was pretty successful at it. I was able to actually prove to myself, if nothing else, that I can do this job and I can do it reasonably well. And in fact, the successes were good enough that eventually my manager and their next level manager said, we really want to increase the size of the team and we're going to need somebody to manage the team. Would you like to do this? And, I was very, very humbled by this opportunity and felt a little bit proud of myself, if I'm being quite honest. And yet after that, after, getting that opportunity, a few days later, I thought to myself, this is a little overwhelming. Can I actually do this job? Can I be a manager in DevRel? Never been a manager before. I've led technical teams, but it's very different doing the management side. And so I ended up starting to learn about, well, what does a manager do in general? And what does management mean for developer relations? And I found out that it's actually quite a few many things. There's tons of books, there's tons of websites, tons of podcasts that you could just continue learning from forever. For me, there were sort of 4 main things that I learned about, how am I going to do this? How is this going to work? What sorts of things do I really, really want to focus on? So let's just start with number 1 here, and that is defining the strategy. So when I say this, I mean, as DevRel, you really have to think about what are the goals of software developers? What is it that they're looking to accomplish? And being in DevRel, you also have to know, well, what is it that your company is looking to accomplish? And how do those two things come together? That's going to be, your strategy. So as manager, it's going to be incumbent upon you to, if not define the strategy completely, at least be really, really heavily invested in helping drive the company towards figuring out what that is. Because the strategy will differ very much between having, let's say, an open source product that wants to have, hundreds, thousands, millions of developers that are contributing and using the product versus maybe a business to business type of product that really only needs a handful of strategic partners in order to be successful. The strategies will be very different. There will be some overlap, but understanding what your developers' use cases are and understanding what your business is trying to achieve is going to be important. And that's one of the big things that somebody in management in DevRel needs to do. And that's something that I've struggled with, certainly, but am getting better every day and learning a lot about what this means and how to do this effectively. So that's the first one. The second thing that a manager would need to do, and that I've had to do, is find the right people. As I mentioned, my manager and their manager wanted to grow the team, and that meant that I had to be responsible for helping to source and recruit and figure out, how do we evaluate folks that we're looking to bring on the team. Thankfully, for me, I was able to find somebody to add to our team. It did take a lot of effort, and it went through several rounds of trying to find people, because it's not just finding anybody, sort of on the street who has skill set. You really want to find somebody that can add to the mix of your team, right? You don't want a bunch of really skilled individuals who just can't work together. It really does need to be a good fit. So finding the right people who have the right skill set, who have the right mindset, and can work together with others really well as a team is a huge part, not just for DevRel managers, but for managers in general. This is one of the biggest things that people struggle with, is how do I find the right people? How do I attract the right people? How do I retain the right people? So that's number two. Number three here is choosing the area of focus. And this goes sort of hand in hand with the idea of defining the strategy. So the strategy is going to be your big picture of, where are we going to focus our attention given the kind of goals that we have, the kind of goals that our developer community has. Choosing an area of focus is much more tactical. So for example, it might be perfectly valid to say, we need to have better documentation. We need to have better sample code available. We may want to do live streams and etc. As a manager, you have to know that there's only so many hours in the day. There's only so many days in the week, only so many weeks in the year. And the right timing for things is going to be important. There might be things like events, for example, that have particular dates that you have to hit. There might be new releases of software products or services that you really want to make sure you have good, solid, developer education available for people to be successful. So even though doing everything is ultimately important in many cases, figuring out what's urgent and what needs to be done now versus what can be done later is going to be huge, right? I mean, the last thing you would want is to say, okay, well, our team spent this entire month making our code samples better. Hey, that's great. That's absolutely better for developers. Unfortunately, we completely missed out on making a set of videos for the conference that was coming up. And so we're not able to be, quite as effective in hitting what our key metrics are or our key goals were. So choosing an area of focus and taking a limited amount of resources and using them really effectively is always huge for a manager. So that's one of the things to think about. The fourth one here is, for what a manager does in general, but it's also really important for DevRel, is improving team performance. So understanding, what's working for your team, and doing more of that, to be quite honest. And the other thing is understanding what's not working, what is difficult or painful for your team. Where are you working hard and not seeing the kind of success that you're hoping for? That's important to keep track of as a manager, because you're going to want to make sure that your team is always effective. And you want to make sure that everybody's, feeling pretty good about their job, right? Nobody wants to fail. So understanding how to make things better over time is going to be one of the things that is critical. And I think in DevRel, we're sort of uniquely positioned where we can sort of see our team's performance and impact on how we can help developers, how effective they are in their community, pretty much right away. It's actually fairly unique to us, where in other organizations, maybe in engineering or product management or design, it's a little bit less clear. Whereas as we produce content, as we have conference talks, as we have maybe even community-based communication with folks, we can see almost real time what that looks like. And so we have more of an ability to adjust more frequently on that. So again, this is going to be super key for a manager. And it's something that I've had to learn a lot about myself. So those are the, sort of 4 things of like, what does a manager do? What have I learned about and having to adjust to this new role? I think next I want to talk about, well, what are the challenges? What are the big things that might keep a manager up at night, or at least keep me personally up at night, thinking about how are we going to approach these challenges? How can I help things become more successful? Pretty similar to some of the things I talked about before. I think one of the big ones right now, especially with the way that the job market is recruiting. It is so challenging to attract and find the right people, because every company is trying to do the same thing. So you're competing with everybody. And whether you are the biggest, fanciest, most exciting tech company to maybe a smaller business, everybody struggles with this. There's no easy path towards recruiting. It's just always hard, because there are only a small number of people who are really good at what they do, and there's just so many opportunities out there. So being able to attract people and recruit them and hire them is, in a way, not that dissimilar, right? Like, think about what we do in DevRel. There's often a lot of helping to let people know why our particular product or service is interesting and something that people should check out. It's kind of the same sort of role that you're running into, of trying to say, hey, here is why my team or my company is interesting and why you should check it out. So recruiting, again, is always going to be tough. And it's something that I think about quite a bit. The other thing related to that is, okay, so you've recruited people, you've found them, you've brought them on board. Now you have to train them up. And again, this is always going to be an interesting challenge, because even in the ideal case where you've maybe found somebody who was working in your industry at a very similar company, that's great, but that's their company. That's those particular sets of developers. That's very different than your company and your developer community and your goals. So no matter what, you're always going to have to spend time training people on what your product is, or how your processes work, or maybe even just, what is the natural rhythm of the way that your company does things, and the way you do software releases, or the way that you approach DevRel. And another thing that really has to be thought about beyond just training is letting others do the work. And this is going to sound weird, right? I think as developer advocates or as individual contributors, it's pretty easy to think about I need to do everything myself. You might have gotten used to doing everything yourself. Like for me, for example, I was the only developer advocate, so I did everything on my own. Now I have a teammate. It doesn't make sense to do everything on my own. And ideally, I really shouldn't, because now we have more capacity to do more. And if you don't let others do the work, you end up in a situation where you kind of end up micromanaging people. And that, for one, is not going to be very satisfying for them. It also means that you're not spending as much time on working on the things that are, most critical. So letting others do the work is one of, and learning how to let go. And maybe people don't do things the same way you think, but that's okay. You can just, learn to let others follow your path. At the same time, the other thing you need to think about is you have to do some of the work yourself too, though, right? You don't want to be too separated from the actual work itself, because it's very easy to just become disassociated from it and not understand sort of the daily grind of what goes into things. And it becomes really easy to lose a sense of what's practical versus what's not practical. So doing some of the work yourself is good, especially because there's always going to be those tasks that, honestly, they're not very terribly exciting, but they are necessary to do. This is a good case to get your hands dirty, get out there, do some of the work that's a little bit less exciting, but necessary, and free up your team to be more effective in other cases. So consider doing that, because that's something that I've had to work on myself as well. So those are the challenges. Let's talk about some of the learning resources that helped me. I think number one here is one that I recommend for a lot of other reasons, but Mary Thengvall, who is pretty big in the DevRel industry, she has the book, The Business Value of Developer Relations. I recommend this in general for other reasons, but today I really want to specify that you go take a look at chapter 5, which is about building a DevRel team. That really helped me think about how I wanted to approach building a team and gave me some really good ideas and pointers. So highly recommend going and checking out that book. Similarly, I found a lot of help and resources available in the DevRel Collective, especially because they have a Slack group where it's easy to go in and ask questions in a nice, safe place where there are other practitioners who have similar challenges, just as you have, as I have, or if others have had. And it's good to get out there and be able to ask, hey, I'm having trouble with this. Can somebody give me some advice, or at least give me a little bit of feedback on these ideas? That's great. And if you didn't catch my talk about being an individual contributor and how that differs from what I'm talking about here as being a manager, at last year's DevRel Asia 2020, I gave a talk called "You're the First DevRel at Your Company, Now What?" So I highly recommend you go check that out. It's on YouTube. And as I said at the beginning here, my name is Jaime Lopez Jr. I'm on Twitter as @DevWithAHair. You can find me and these slides on GitHub @DevWithHair. Check out my podcast, More Than Just Code, mtjc.fm, and thank you very much.